my name is Dan Hennett. Today is May 31st, 2020, and today's podcast will be going over the book The Gray Stage, written by Greg Fernandez Jr. Today's chapter will be Chapter 4, Examining the Bodies. Joined with us today will be Sophia, Catherine, Greg, and myself. If you got the book handy, it's on page 27. And what I'll do is I'll start off and I'll read the first paragraph, and then we can get the show started. Here's where it starts. Title: Examinations. The bodies of David, Comel, and Rania were removed from the house at 1:30 a.m. on January 18th and taken to the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office. Rania's autopsy was conducted first at 8:20 a.m. Comel's autopsy began 10 minutes later at 8:30 a.m. And David's body was conducted last at 11:50 a.m. So that's the first section. Maybe, Greg, I can give a little overview here for the listeners. And so the bodies were discovered on the 17th of January. That is a Saturday in 2015. This was Saturday the 17th. But by the time the investigation was there, the photos were taken, the bodies were examined, and the crime scene was looked into. It crossed over past midnight onto the 18th. And so that's where it starts off with this chapter that really was taken out of the house at 1:30 a.m. the following day, which is now, we're talking Sunday, January 18th. And the crime was committed in Dakota County. And so the importance of this first thing here, it mentions that they went to Hennepin County. The Dakota County does not have their own medical examiner's office or coroner. And so what they do is they subcontract out to the neighboring county, which is Hennepin County, which is based in downtown Minneapolis. So that's a good setting here that you've set here, Greg, with this first paragraph, because it does, if there's any confusion there, the bodies are found on the 17th. This is the 18th, the next day, but still that same night, essentially. And so what they did was they brought them to the medical examiner's office, which I said earlier was contracted out through Hennepin County, and they did those 7 hours later now at 8:20 a.m., and then Comel, and then David's was done last. Just want to give an overview of that for if there was any confusion.
Well, that's good to know. Yeah, I did not know that. Is that regular? I mean, are there a lot of other counties that also don't, that...
The Hennepin County does their own, and then they subcontract out with Dakota, which is the one here, and they also subcontract out with Scott. Scott County is also next door. And so Scott and Dakota both subcontract out, and just rather than pay to have the medical examiner and examiner's offices, there's so few murders and homicides and things like that they just have Hennepin County handle all of that. But it is in a different county. They got to drive the bodies up there. It's another outsourced service for the county, and they just absorb that. So they account for 3 counties at Hennepin County. And so at the end of the year, they provide an annual report for Hennepin County, and it's really large because they've got to break it down for the members of Scott County, Dakota County, and Hennepin County. Even though they're doing they're doing them all, they do have to break that out. So their annual report is quite large. But once again, even in Apple Valley, the city of Apple Valley, there's only average of 1 homicide per year. So they're still doing deaths, suicides, and things like that. But actually, full autopsies like this, they don't have the staff or the funding to do it themselves, so they just hire it out.
Okay. Yeah, because one of the things I was wondering is, okay, the bodies are taken out at 1:30 a.m. The first, Rania's autopsy doesn't start until, 8:20. So again, I was just trying to understand if this is all proper. If everything that we're seeing here is just all proper, to me, it seems like a long time, but I don't know if that's kind of standard, and maybe that's because they had to drive it, somewhere else. And maybe that's part of the
And
reason why.
maybe
I don't know.
Catherine would be a good person to start off with this, because I also don't know, but I'm just guessing that there was in a situation like this, there's still going to be a queue, a QUE queue, and once they get into the queue, maybe they're 7 hours later. Would it make sense that it would be that late? But I don't know.
Well, to jump in, I would assume that the reason why the first autopsy didn't begin until 8:20 is because Dr. Lelinski more than likely needed to go home and get some sleep. And I want to go back and notice, because according to the records and her sign-in sheet, she was there from 12 until 12:45. She left. Mm-hmm. It is also stated that the bodies left with her. Now, this is saying, and Greg, according to your book, you're showing that you found information where the bodies didn't leave the house until 1:30 a.m. That's, as we know, a 45-minute difference. But to get back to the point, I'm sure she probably just had to go home and get some sleep before the autopsies began, and that would be my best guess.
Okay, that makes sense. Any other points or any questions anyone has? Yeah, I'll have to look at that time and figure out where I found that time. It could be from Joe Cooksley's notes, so I'll look at that. The first autopsy is obviously Rania, and that is another question that I had. Okay, is that normal? Is it standard operating to if there is a crime and they need to do this for a couple bodies, do they do children first? Is it just random? Is there any logic? Am I thinking too much into this? Does it really matter?
It really doesn't matter, and it's just, they probably just said, let's do the child first. It's, probably what was, I don't know, easiest, or, but there's generally no rhyme or reason. They just pick a body and go from there.
And they have, this is the only autopsy, I believe, where there are 4 officers. I think in the other 2 there might be 1 or 2, but not 4. So I was also wondering about that. Again, is that just standard too? Did they feel some special need to actually be there during this one, and not the same need to be there when they're looking at Kamel and looking at David? I think there might be 2 for Kamel, and then for David, I'm not even sure if there is 1, if there's any cops in there. Yeah, there is. There's 2. But why 4? And again, maybe I'm thinking too much into this, but as somebody who just wants to learn about, what they do, and what are the proper things? Is it normal to have that many people in there? Is it a little intimidating for the people that are doing these reports to have 4 cops standing right in there, or is it just not a big deal?
Yeah, I can't think of anything or any reason why they would need 4 officers in on her autopsy. That makes no sense. There's no rhyme or reason to that at all. We don't know how big the autopsy room is. Is it a big bay? Are they individual rooms? We don't know, unless someone has been into the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's office. So to have 4 police officers with 2 medical doctors, that's 5 people in a room, and that's pretty crowded. So that doesn't make sense to me at all. It's just crazy.
Okay, and Jessica Lelinski was the pathologist, and she was assisted by Mitchell Morey.
She's the medical examiner. The pathologist was not there, although they signed off on it.
Okay.
The pathologist is the one who's the head of everything. That would be Dr. Lauren Jackson, but only Dr. Lelinski, the medical examiner, and Mitchell Morey, who is the assistant medical examiner, were in the room.
Okay, so that needs to be changed then, I think, right, in my book? She's the medical examiner, not the pathologist, because I wrote the pathologist. Can you explain the difference?
Yeah,
well,
explain
the
the difference.
pathologist,
I'm
I'm sorry.
unclear on that myself. Go ahead, Catherine. I'm unclear on that myself. Go ahead, Catherine.
The pathologist is generally going to be the person who's going to be running the entire facility. They're kind of like the top dog. The medical, and I do believe they have to have extra education. And Dr. Lilinski is just basically a physician who has training within the forensic and this type of field. So she doesn't have as much education as Dr. Jackson, and Dr. Jackson runs the facility. So Dr. Lilinski would answer to Dr. Jackson. And so, yeah, she's not a pathologist.
Okay. Good to know there, too. The main thing, I think, that everybody should be bothered by, or at least should have questions on, I know this was a big question that came up, is how they positively identify this daughter. And it's listed as circumstantial. So,
okay. I'm sorry.
Before I read too much into that, go.
Well, I spoke with a coroner, and I asked them that same question. I'm like, is that normal? Is that standard operating procedure to identify, especially children, in that manner? And they said yes, because if they have two parents and all this other stuff, basically they kind of go, well, the circumstantial evidence will be the child is in the house, the child looks like the parents, the child looks like the photos. There's someone there to say, yes, that is our granddaughter, that type of thing. So they don't have to then do blood tests to say, okay, they don't have to basically do a DNA test, because circumstantially they are able to prove that this is Rania Crowley. So that is very normal.
Excellent. Another note that I have here about this one, unless anybody has any points they want to jump in there, still staying on the Rania Crowley autopsy. No suit or stippling. What does that mean?
It means she wasn't shot. She wasn't shot close up. It was from further away. Stippling would be left behind if the gun was close to her head. If it was up close and personal.
Okay. Like 1 foot, 2 feet?
Well, it's hard to say, and that's the thing, is unless something is put between the weapon and the head, are they at a further distance, or is it just, I mean, with this type of weapon, I would find it hard to believe, like Sophia was saying, that the stippling and soot, they should have found something within her hair, you know. So obviously, but yet, and still, isn't her autopsy the one that says that there was a circular pattern left on her scalp? So that's the thing that didn't make much sense to me. You know, because if they're going to have a circular pattern, yet there isn't stippling or soot, why didn't they question that? And I guess that was kind of my question to them. One of my questions to them is, why didn't they look further into that?
If she was, I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out how far she would have to be, or does that mean that she was covered with something? If her face was covered, if her head was covered, could that be the reason why there wasn't any?
It could be either or, yet they still don't explain let's see, what does it say here? It says the wound is surrounded by an approximately 0.5 centimeter wide faint circular impression. I mean, I don't even see anywhere did they measure that up against the muzzle of the gun. I see they didn't follow that up at all, so we don't know. But either way, it's plausible that something was placed between the weapon and her head, or it was farther away. One of the two.
And it also
This is
says,
Stephanie.
go ahead.
If,
Hey, Stephanie.
like if a pillow was put in between her head and the gun, that would keep it, like, soot and the impression from the gun from being there, just to clarify?
Well, again, it would probably capture the soot and the stippling or the little gunpowder pellets that shoots out. But I'm not sure if it, depending on how thick of a pillow, if it's thick, it's not going to leave an impression from the weapon. So, you know, I think right here in this situation, we're guessing, we're throwing things out to the wind and seeing what's going to come back at us, because there's really not enough information, and they just did not investigate this at all. I see nothing in any of the records or in any of the reports where they did any follow-up to this situation.
Correct. And they didn't test things for the gunpowder, so we don't know what covered her head, if anything.
Correct.
It also says that she was found partially decomposed with, it actually uses the words for moderate decomposition. So again, looking for a timeline of how long she could have been dead for. What is the range that we should be looking at? I know we've talked about this before, but I think it's a very important point. Moderate decomposition, especially when later it says that it's actually early to moderate decomposition in the same report.
Yeah, so early to moderate is going to be like right after death to maybe about a week. And with the rest of her decompositional findings on autopsy, when they say moderate, I'm assuming it's going to be getting closer to about a week in after death. So she's starting to show some signs of decomp. So it's not obviously a fresh death where, you know, okay, something happened, they walk in and, okay, this child is now dead, where, you know, we now have some type of skin discoloration and some blistering. So, you know, again, roughly about a week.
Wow. And so they would have known that too. And then how do they account for their 3-week story? I guess they're a separate agency, right? So I guess they don't really have to, but if pushed, they would have to say that the bodies were not there for 3 weeks.
Yeah, and then when you look at these autopsy reports, I don't see anywhere anyway, unless, of course, I looked past it, but I don't see anything in these reports that show that these bodies had been laying there for 3 weeks. They, everything that's, you know, when they describe the decomp and the condition of the bodies, when they're stating early to moderate, they're saying right there that it isn't advanced decomp, which is what you see in every single police report, advanced decomposition. And then these medical doctors are coming back saying, no, it's early to moderate decomposition. So right there, I find a huge discrepancy where the medical examiners kind of do not follow the narrative of the police officers.
Can I jump in for a sec? This is Dan.
Yeah.
A question is, what I've got is, for Greg, at this point, this is the following morning after the bodies are being found. So at this point, was there only one press release given by Apple Valley Police just simply stating suspicious deaths, they're looking into it? They have yet to make this determination within, I think it was a 48-hour period where they said, we think the bodies are there, or, a double homicide-suicide. But they didn't get into the narrative until later as far as the bodies were there for 3 weeks. So at the time of this, the medical examiner, they're looking at the bodies, and they're just they don't know how long the bodies were there at this point. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. It doesn't come in later till we get this 3-week narrative, but right now we're just getting some very preliminary verbiage that's inconsistent, I'll say, as far as, you know, the moderate versus early or late. But even the cops at the scene there don't know that, you know, hey, the bodies are there for, they just know they're decomposing, in the process of decomposing, but they don't know it's even 3 weeks yet, much less, you know, Jessica Lelinski on the scene. They're just looking at the bodies knowing that they're decomposed. But wouldn't at this point, too, Catherine, they would at least have it narrowed down by saying, looks like the bodies had been 7 to 10 days or 11 to 15 days. They would start at this point already narrowing it down regardless of what they get from police.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that these doctors should know, you know, when they walk in on a scene, they're looking at the temperature of the room, they're looking at, you know, the condition of the house in which they find the body, or the scene in which they find the bodies, that she should have been able to say, okay, this is probably what we're looking at, and then not make an outright judgment, but she should have a really good idea, and then either it would be substantiated by the autopsy or she would find something different. So yeah, she should have had a pretty good idea. Even though she was almost freshly out of school, she still should have known.
Yeah, I think she would have been 30, 31 years old at this point. I looked her up today. I think she's 36, and this was 5 years ago. So she would have been roughly 31 years old. Does that match with being freshly out of school for her degree, her career?
Well, it depends on how old she was when she started, but I think in my research of her, when I looked at when she graduated the medical school and then when she had started working there, it was just, you know, it was either not too long ago, it was less than a couple of years.
Okay. Yeah, she was young, a young person at the time in her position. Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I had for that.
Yeah, I'm actually looking to see exactly when they mention, or if they mention, in the 5 press releases that they have, just trying to see if they mention how long the bodies were there. Just looking at it right now. I don't see it in the first 3. So, but that, again, goes back to, well, where did this 3-week theory come from? You know, is it because people hadn't heard from them in 3 weeks? They hadn't been seen in 3 weeks? I had a hard time with that.
Yeah, I'm assuming that's what they're going by, because a lot of people were giving false dates to begin with, because we know by the phone records and by following up and actually researching their testimonies that they were not truthful. But most of them were saying the last time they spoke to them or saw them were 3 weeks prior. So
The final press release, which is dated January 23rd, 2015, does state that, where is it? Investigators have determined the last verified activity from the residence happened in late December. So maybe that's what they're going on. I don't know, but obviously that's not it's not a good way to find the truth in this case.
That is not consistent with the findings of the autopsy. So, and
sticking to the decomp, to the moderate, early to moderate decomp, says that the livor and the rigor mortis were not found. The livor, the discoloration of skin; rigor mortis, the stiffness of death. Those were not found. So that again helps us. Mm-hmm.
And I wanted, I mean, the rigor comes and goes relatively quickly within, you know, depending on when it falls in. It usually does its whole course. If everything is consistent, 12, 16 hours, whatever, it's pretty consistent. But the livor mortis, you know, if she had been shot, if Rania had been shot and killed, and then if paleo had taken her arm after death, this young lady would have had livor mortis. Now, livor mortis is where the line of lividity, where there would be a marking of where the blood would then pool in the body upon her death. Wherever she laid and landed, it would have remained there, and you would have seen where that blood had pooled. Now, that is completely missing in all three bodies, which, you know, leaves very limited reasons as to why. So, again, why, even the medical examiner, why did the medical examiner not look up and follow, especially on a young child? Why is the young child, why is the livor mortis, why is that absent? It shouldn't be.
And then, even so, according to the external examination, early to moderate decomposition is evidenced by skin discoloration, marbling, blistering, slippage, and partial mummification of the face, left hand, and feet. I mean, this is pretty brutal to think about, but again, we're just trying to figure out what really happened here. So does this contradict what they had just said, that there were no livor or
liver
mortis?
Livor mortis is just where the blood pools, which is not the same thing as skin marbling.
Okay. And skin discoloration?
Correct. It's not the same.
Okay.
Like skin can go to a yellow color, a greenish color, that type of thing. That's what they're talking about.
Okay. And the slippage, what exactly is that?
That's kind of like, say, where little blisters or blobs or blebs, or what I think they're called blebs, where they kind of begin to fill with fluid, and then as they rupture, the skin will start to come off with it. It's, you know, again, all part of where it's getting closer to the moderate decomp phase.
Yeah, this was a really tough chapter because, you know, I have no experience with any of this stuff. I was constantly looking up these things, and even the stuff that I looked up, you know, I'd have to go back now and probably look up a lot of that stuff. This was very tough, not only because we're talking about a child, first of all, but just to try to understand this and to just stick to the facts as much as possible, because obviously, since I don't know that much, my mind can start racing. Oh, well, maybe it means this, or maybe it means that. And so I really tried to, that's probably why this is another short chapter, is I really just tried to keep it to what these reports are stating, so that people like Catherine and people who understand what is being said here, then I can bounce those ideas off of them, and they can help me to better understand without making me feel stupid too, right? That's always a good thing.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I think you did a good job writing this, and I mean, please don't feel stupid. It's not always an easy topic to understand.
Yeah. Very challenging. So the examiners also observed evidence of post-mortem animal scavenging, and so I was expecting to find more, expecting to find a lot more than what I found. Now maybe this is just because this is the autopsy report, maybe there's more notes, but this is one of the only mentions of quote-unquote scavenging by the dog. And I had a hard time with that too, because the reasoning, I was just expecting more. Some of the reasoning why they said this, that there was possible animal scavenging, is because the daughter's right arm was completely gone. I don't know how that necessarily just means that there is animal scavenging, or how that proves, or how that would even lead someone down that path, that there was some type of scavenging, unless they were told, unless they were kind of fed that. It just seems like they're just throwing out a lot of different stuff. And when we're looking at these documents, it it kind of breaks their whole theory, that the dog did any of this stuff. But it gets worse. You know, it's not just that. They also mentioned, you know, okay, the jagged and tattered skin of soft tissue defects where Ranya's arm would have connected to her shoulder. So it's really hard for me to buy that the dog would eat any type of bones, swallow them, digest them, and whatever. But we're talking about a whole arm. Even a 5-year-old's arm, that's pretty big. That's pretty big. And if the whole arm is missing, how would there be any jagged or tattered skin? Of course there would be, because the arm was pulled off, right? The arm was ripped off. So how do they relate that and know that that this was done by that dog? I was expecting to find dog teeth marks. I wanted him to say, look, we found dog teeth marks at the shoulder, so obviously, you know, that's why it was jagged, tattered, et cetera, So in a report like this, are they giving me everything that I would need, or are they just giving me the basics?
I mean, here it's like, it's the basics at best. And we have to keep in mind that this is just the, what do they call it? And I think they just call this like the autopsy report, but there is a medical examiner's report. And that is where it's going to contain a whole bunch of the information, but as the general public, we are not privy to that. That is not part of the FOIA process. So, you know, that's what I wish I could get my hands on, is the actual medical examiner's report. I want to see, because like you stated, not one of these autopsy reports mention dog teeth marks on any of the bones. I mean, if this dog is going to be gnawing and pulling, and especially where the hands are involved, they just don't pop off, which is what it seems like they want people to believe. They, be it the medical examiner's office or the police, they just want people to think that the dog grabbed hold of a hand, yanked, and the sucker just popped off. It doesn't happen like that. So the dog, if it truly had bitten and pulled off, there would be, I mean, it would be beyond obvious. They would be saying, okay, teeth marks, teeth scraping on the bones, whatever. And I don't see any of that. Like you were stating, none of that is mentioned in any of the reports.
If I can jump in for a sec, I think, Catherine, you'll agree with this, is that what I read into this by looking at this, it reminds me of the bloody footprint, that there's no evidence that it was David's, but they went through and said that, well, Comel had socks on, and it wasn't a child's foot, so therefore it must have been David's. I get the same type of logic while reading this. Her arm is missing, so therefore there's evidence of animal scavenging. Well, that's not the evidence we're looking for, as far as when Greg got that report, he's looking for evidence. Was there teeth, claws, scratching, paws, evidence like that. But what they're saying is that there's evidence of animal scavenging because the arm was missing, and therefore how else would it be gone? So there's the evidence, and that's not what Greg's looking for, is evidence, specifically teeth marks, claws, how did it get out of that socket? And so us four looking at this, and I think we got others on the call too, I think Stephanie and someone else perhaps, but we're looking for, we are, as critical thinkers, that doesn't work as evidence. That's conclusion, that's a theory. If the arm is missing and the dog was there, well, the dog ate it. But we'd like to see them say, maybe the dog ate it, or perhaps the dog ate it, or it's possible that the dog ate it. But what we don't like, the folks like us who are critical thinkers, is when the medical examiner says it's evidence of dog scavenging. Well, there is no evidence of evidence of dog scavenging. Does that make sense?
I absolutely agree with everything you just said, and that's exactly it. We tend to get attacked because people say that we do a lot of conjecture. I mean, this is conjecture definition, you know what I mean? It's like, if everything that they are stating in regard to animal scavenging is conjecture. a dog was at the scene, parts are missing, therefore the dog did it. Well, like you stated, and we all know, that's not true, and there's no proof.
Is there a difference between scavenging and the dog being responsible for this, or is it pretty much the same thing?
It's the same thing. Scavenging would be the consuming consuming, taking, eating of an animal on a body. Predation, scavenging, depending, I think, on predation, I think, really kind of goes to the wild animals, and scavenging would be considered maybe household pets. But yeah, basically the same thing. It would be the eating or tearing at a human body by an animal in the home.
Okay. The only other thing I have on Rania is the fractured third rib. How does a rib get fractured, even in a child's, for a child's rib? How hard, how difficult would that be? Have we ever heard of any dogs ever breaking fracturing a rib? What type of force would need to be?
A lot of force. When people do CPR, oftentimes you can fracture and break ribs then. But when CPR is done correctly, you are pressing down. What you see on TV it's a joke. That's not true compressions. I mean, you are pushing down with everything you have and as fast as you can. There's a lot of pounds per square inch being put on those ribs, so they crack and they break. The same thing, especially in this area under the arm, there's no way Paleo could have fractured her rib. None whatsoever. And so a lot of pressure would have to have been applied to that section of the body to fracture that rib.
And where's the location of this rib, Catherine, for the listeners out there?
It says that it is under, let me see, I think it's under... Okay, the lateral right first to fourth ribs are showing, and the lateral right third rib is fractured. Lateral meaning the outside, so it would be the side of her. Okay. So basically where the under the arm would be, somewhere in that area where that third rib is.
And some have suggested on the Justice page in the past, years back, that maybe after she was shot, she fell awkwardly and maybe fractured it. Or was in an argument and her dad yanked her arm or something, and during a struggle that could have fractured it. And those are not examples of a fracture.
No.
At all. Okay.
No. If anything, if there was a struggle or a yanking on the arm, there would have been maybe a slight dislocation. But I mean, you would have to pull pretty hard, even for a 5-year-old. Up until like young children, 1, 2, it's easy to dislocate their arms. So that's why doctors will, a lot of times, pediatricians will tell parents, don't hold your kids between you and swing them, right? Because that used to be a fun thing to do. But I can't tell you how many children every year come into the ER with dislocated arms because the parents were simply swinging their children, not doing anything to hurt them. And that's because the ligaments and everything truly aren't really set, so to speak. But in a 5-year-old, that would be extremely difficult to dislocate even a 5-year-old's arm, in the sense of, I mean, you would have to seriously yank and pull. And there is no evidence of any kind of struggle, or there's no bruising to her body that would show a struggle, ensued, nothing. So there's nothing to substantiate David dislocated her arm. I mean, her arm's missing too, but we know that who David was as a person does not fit with that theme or whatever. I don't know. I can't think of the correct word.
Is there any reason?
It doesn't fit with the narrative.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
If the rib fracture and her arm being taken off was done before she died, there would be a significant way to show. I mean, there is a way to see the difference of if something was done before death or after death, like the way the blood pools and everything like that.
There would be more than a blood pooling. There's a brachial artery in there, and if once that brachial artery is severed, I mean, you're going to have spewing and arterial spray, and there would be blood everywhere. Her blood would be absolutely everywhere, and yet we don't find her blood anywhere with the exception of maybe on the gun and on the knife. So yeah, there would be evidence of that. If it occurred within the house, let me put that little caveat in there.
So that tells us that this was possibly done after she died?
Either after she died or it didn't occur in the house.
Okay. But there's no way to tell, based on what we have here, if this was ripped out or whatever, whatever you want to say, that it was fractured.
If we'll put it this way, if they want to say that she died in the home, then the arm was removed after death.
But if she didn't die in the home, then it's possible it was not after death.
Correct.
Okay. Is there any reason why it would be the third rib and not the first, second, and fourth?
Probably because the first and the second ribs are going to be up higher to the clavicle. So they're kind of like a little bit shorter. And in the third and the fourth, that type of thing, it's going to be easier underneath the armpit to be able to either apply pressure to that area and fracture those ribs than it would be the first and second.
Is there one stronger? Are they strong? Because we're going from north to south, right? 1, 2, 3, 4.
They're all going to be roughly the same. It would take the same amount of strength to fracture any of those ribs, but it's just where they're located within the body, and you know where it would be easier to apply pressure to those ribs versus the first or the second rib. The first and the second aren't going to be as accessible to that type of pressure where the third and fourth ribs would be.
Okay.
Catherine, I have a question. The theory right now that we're working with because of this arm being off is that someone killed Rania and then threw their foot, leveraged a human foot in there and then yanked it off post-mortem. And then the dog may or may not have scavenged on it after that. But during this autopsy, would the medical examiner doing it see a footprint or a shoe print or an impression in that armpit that would be noticeable, or would that be something that would have gone away, or what are your thoughts?
It's a little bit harder to bruise the skin after death because the blood ceases to flow upon death. Once that heart stops beating, blood stops flowing. And so you have to have like that blood going through that area in order for it to be, the vessels to be damaged and have that blood come out.
Okay, as opposed to bruising, how about an impression, like a boot or a hiking boot or a shoe or a tennis shoe impression? Would that be left behind?
And again, that kind of goes along with the same thing. You get the impressions by the damage that's done to the tissue, and is there going to be like, it would be harder on a fresh kill or whatever. Oh, I hate saying this because she's such a child, but I don't mean it that way. There's really no swelling that's really going on to leave an impression. There's really no blood vessels are going to be active to let blood seep through to leave an impression. So I think it's possible, but maybe not as probable. But yet, that doesn't mean maybe they saw something underneath when they pulled back that skin, but I don't see where that type of description is given to us in this report. This is really so vague. You know, maybe there was but we don't know.
And then my last question is, if this was taken off and kept by the killer or killers as a trophy, what would the smell or the stench be like? You know, a body goes through the phase of stinking,
Right.
say. But would a body part, if someone kept that as a trophy, how well sealed or in kind of a plastic wrap or something, or buried? You know, would it cause a stench that would be noticeable? A body part?
Yes. Decomposition and when tissue begins to, you know, decompose and rot and stuff, it stinks. You know, even if you have like a small piece of hamburger, like say you have, you know, raw hamburger the size of a hamburger patty, and you left that out, you know that's going to smell horribly within a few days. It's the same thing with the body part. It would smell horribly. However, if it's wrapped up enough, or was it stuck in a embalming fluid or something else stuck into a jar in something that would preserve it, then that could mitigate the smell. There are ways to mitigate, but it's not easy.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other points or anything on that before we move on to Camille? I mean, I had a few questions, just personally, I guess. You know, we're just, well, why would her arm need to be taken out? And if the dog is going to eat the arm, why not eat both arms? And there's just no logic to any of this dog theory, which again, all could have been proven if they just would have done some testing. But I don't understand why would they need, if there is foul play, and I think we all agree that obviously if David is not guilty, then somebody else did this. Why would her arm, specifically her right arm, need to be taken from the scenes? Was there something that the police were going to find that would have showed a sign of struggle? I mean, personally, to me, the fact that her arm is missing is a possible sign of a struggle. The fact that you guys have clearly pointed out about the third rib, how is that not a sign of a possible struggle?
Well, I think it's possible. I think it's very possible that something was that could have given the police or the medical examiner a hint or a clue as to who truly did this. Did they leave their DNA on her arm? Was she trying to get away and then they accidentally scratched her or something? You know, there are lots of different things. What, you know, was there, I mean, who knows? Everything at this stage is just a big guess, you know. They could have easily have left, somehow their DNA could have been left on her arm to where they couldn't have gotten rid of it, unless. Or was her arm taken because David was somewhere else, and then was that a form of torture for him? Look what we're doing. We don't know. And yes, I know that's an extreme, but it's just, you know, another example. We just don't know. And that's a good question.
The point, and Catherine, you have a good point that we don't know, and there could be 15, 20 different examples why. But the main thing to focus on for the listeners out there is that a arm could not be pulled from the socket by a dog, correct? So there's human intervention in there at some point of this whole scenario. Some have gone so far to say that, you know, after 3 weeks of decomposition, there was not much left of the skull, the skin or the bones, and paleo did not have to try that hard to rip it out of there. The point we're trying to make on episodes like this on this podcast is the fact that the socket, after 3 months of decomposition, or after 1, or after 2, whatever, the dog would not have been able to pull a girl's arm out of its socket regardless. So some human did it, and that's the catch. Yes, there certainly could have been some torture involved, or evidence of torture left behind that warranted the killers requiring to get rid of that, or it could have been a trophy, it could have been, who knows what kind of symbolism, maybe it was left behind, maybe it was a coded message or something, but we could talk forever on those possible examples. The fact is, and the fact that what we say the Apple Valley Police Department did not consider is that the dog could not have done it. When I spoke with lead detective James Gummert at the Apple Valley Police Department in the lobby, I said, what happened to that arm? And he said, well, I'm assuming the dog ate it. I said, but where's the bones and, you know, everything else? And how could the dog have done it? Well, I don't know. The arm wasn't there, so therefore the dog ate it. And see, we get back into that same thinking of what we're missing here is critical thinking. It couldn't have happened that way. What could have happened and what actually happened, I don't know, and we can only speculate. But if the arm cannot be pulled out of the socket by the dog, well, then we got an issue. And some say, well, then David did it before he killed everybody. Well, that's possible, but probably not very probable. The problem is someone pulled that arm out, and why? And so that's we're trying to get at the facts here, the facts, and steer away from the speculation. There could be a dozen reasons why that arm was missing. The point is the arm was gone, and it was pulled out of the socket, and something that paleo cannot do. So that's the question, is why. And so obviously with that broken bone underneath that armpit in that rib, I think there was some leverage used, and some can speculate, well, maybe Kamel did it during all this, and maybe David did it. Well, maybe so, but then where is the bone? Where is the bone remnants? Where are the bones? They're not in that home.
And not only that, with the police trying to say that paleo took that arm, they have no idea when that arm went missing. Was it right after death? Was it a week after her death? Was it 10 days after her death? You know, because if they want, well, first of all, and like you were stating, a dog cannot pull that arm out of the socket, you know, even 3 weeks. Even if they were correct and it was 3 weeks, that still is not enough to be able to allow that dog to pull the arm off. But since there's no indication and no proof when that arm was removed from the body, we know that a dog definitely cannot do it right after a person dies. We know a dog cannot do it a week after, 2 weeks after, 3 weeks after. And so I'm like, where do they even get this, that the dog pulled it off? When?
Correct. And there's, you know, evidence could possibly suggest with that rear slider left open and unlocked and ajar that the killer or killers made one, if not one or more visits post-mortem to that scene and could have taken it then. But the point is still, who took the arm and why? As we know for sure, it wasn't paleo. So that's the good thing that we've got here with a book like this with Greg, is we're pointing out facts. We're not looking at the speculation and the possible theories. Police investigators have got to get over the fact that that arm was pulled out of the socket. A crime took place, not by the dog. So that's the thing that we're trying to point out here, is that this is, not only was this girl Rania executed, what I call a single gunshot behind the left ear. That's an execution. And this is a 5-year-old girl in kindergarten that was executed. That's how disgusting this case is. And now we add to that an arm missing, a broken rib. This reaches all new lows when we get into this. And we haven't even gotten to the autopsies of Kamel and David yet.
Correct.
That's how shocking this case is, in my view.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yep, I agree too. You're right on. It's well stated. Dan, I know you gotta jump off here soon. I do believe that when Kenneth Maines also found, he talked about the third rib too, right? That was one of the things that kind of stuck out to the private investigator that you hired.
Yes, he had two comments. One was the arm was missing, and he thought that was strange, is all that he really said. You know, he didn't expand, he didn't research it further, he didn't write anything more about it. He just said, oh, that seemed more or less, to summarize, he said in his report, oh, that just seemed odd. Well, this certainly is odd. But then when I went back to a follow-up, and I gave him a list of questions that required follow-up. One was I said, Kenneth, how do you explain a fractured rib under the girl's armpit of that? That would not just get there. That would not just happen. Something would have to be done. He goes, yeah, I agree. That's something that I would look into, further, or, if I was actually hired to be a private eye in this case, to delve into it, that'd be something I would look into. So it raised his antenna, but the arm missing, he just simply said was strange. So.
Have you posted any of the stuff about his about the second follow-up? I don't know if I've asked you that or not.
With Kenneth Maines?
Yeah, with Kenneth Maines.
Yeah, I think there was a list of, I don't know if it was 10 or 12 questions that I asked him, and then he did write back. He wrote back the answers to those questions, and then I posted that. This would have been last summer or last fall. I could certainly repost it because we're getting a lot of new members in the group, and that may be something to look at. But yeah, and I don't have much. And like I said, Greg, I do have to jump off here in a few minutes, but I don't have many questions. I think on the David or Carmel, but the Rania one was very interesting just because of those points. And we do have to remember too that her shirt that she was wearing was pulled up, kind of yanked up above her, kind of up on her chest. Her chest was exposed, and so, but nothing, as far as there's been no evidence of any kind of sexual assault on any of the victims. But her shirt was yanked up like that, and I think once again they say maybe the dog could have done that or whatever. But very, very shocking, the whole scenario with Rania. I think very disgusting.
Yeah, because there's nobody else's clothes that are pulled up or anything like that, and I mean, all that they would have to do is say, well, yeah, the dog. It looks like the dog. We found dog teeth, or we found something to show that the dog had done that. They don't even talk about that. There's many things that they don't talk about, almost like they were just hoping that people would never look deeper into it, and people would never get a chance to see the
plan to not have anyone do any further research. And when we looked into where she was buried was another thing too, because it came back that said that Rania was cremated, and then we find out that her ashes were split in two sides, and so that both families could have her ashes. The Crowley family, the grandparents, and the Alam family, the grandparents. And after asking the Alam family when they received that and where it is to this day, they said they just recently got it. I think it was a year ago, which means there's a 4-year gap, 3 or 4 years later, before they even got it. And Dan Crowley Sr. he had it in his home, and I'm not going to say that he refused to send it, but they said they've been asking for it and they wanted it, but he still had it. And then finally, I think he just sent it FedEx down to Texas for them to have. But even that was there was confusion in who was supposed to have the remains and how they were supposed to get there. But nonetheless, she was cremated, and both of the remains were put in half, and I think they were buried with Comel later, obviously, or next to her body. Who knows where that is, but there was evidence at one point that they were saying that they were going to be buried together. The ashes were combined. And so there was a lot of confusion with that too. But officially, I think both families have half of Rania's remains, but she was cremated, so there's no chance to go back either with to exhume a body to look into some of this further research because the body was cremated.
Yeah, and I had I had asked Camel's sister's friend, or the friend, how do you make sure that those are actually that it was actually Rania? Now that it's cremated, how do they make? Is there any way to verify that the ashes that they got are actually hers?
And I think that's a good question for anyone getting cremated, and maybe Catherine can expand on that. Do you ever know you're just given ashes. Who knows whose they even are? But you're right. Did Dan Crowley Sr. Mail off someone else's ashes to them, and so he's got the whole thing? I highly doubt that, but whatever he got, he was still sitting on for a couple of years before he mailed them off. And I think there was some, expense related to that, and it was expensive, and they didn't want to do that right away. But the whole thing was fishy with the remains. They were sitting in Dan Crowley Sr.'s house, both sets of Rania's remains.
So there had to be some level of trust between the two families that, okay, at least we know that we're getting Rania's, that it actually is coming from Rania, that the ashes are hers. So I guess that shows that there is some level of trust between the two sides of this family, who have been mostly quiet throughout the whole thing and might not even know a lot of this stuff. And they might be listening now. And it might be a good time for them to go through these documents, to look at them for the first time, if they haven't. And they might have some of the same basic questions that we're all having now.
Yeah, and I think, too, I wouldn't be so sure about that level of trust. There may have been a little or maybe a small amount of trust, or maybe perhaps no trust at all, but I do know that it took repeated efforts to get Dan Crowley Sr. to mail those down. And it wasn't until he actually did it, when it got exposure on the Justice for David Crowley and Family Facebook group, when we really exposed that, is when he finally followed through and did it. So, I don't know if he, I wouldn't even say that we have evidence to show that there was even support between the families as far as trust, I should say. He may have done it begrudgingly, but it's because we brought it up and voiced the concerns that really brought the action to take place.
All right, Dan. Well, I know you gotta jump off here, but
good luck, guys. Thanks again for having me on.
Thanks, Dan.
for all your help.
All right, bye-bye.
There goes Dan. All of this is his fault. He started all this, and yeah, that's it. Any final thoughts? Anything else anybody wants to say on Rania before we move on to Kamel?
Actually, I'm going to have to jump off too.
Okay.
But it was great speaking with all of you.
Thanks, Sophia.
Have a great weekend, what's left of it.
All right.
Okay.
You too.
Bye.
So, Kamel's autopsy happens 10 minutes later after Rania's. When Rania's begins at 8:20 a.m., Kamel's begins at 8:30 a.m. And just as a different note, we also see that David's doesn't start until 11:50. And again, that was another question that I had. Well, why are they so? Are they doing the victims first and then they're going to do David's last? Is there any rhyme or reason to that, or is it just kind of random? Just okay, well, let's do this one first. Maybe I'm thinking too much into that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I just think they just it was just luck of the draw and said, let's just do them in this order. I'm not sure if it really meant anything. But I see where you did get pathologists. The reports do state, so, don't change your book because you're leaving it according to where their reports are. And it does list Walensky as the pathologist on Rania's autopsy, and then Mitchell Morey on Kamel's. Although I will disagree with that, just based on after speaking with some medical examiners and coroners as to the difference between a pathologist and a medical examiner. But I wouldn't change your book. Leave it as it is. Okay.
Yeah, and maybe that's just how their template. They just have a template, and they just put whoever's looking at the body, they put that there.
Yeah, that's what I think.
For Mitchell Morey, so he's going to be the only, if you look at Kamel's autopsy report. He's the only one there.
Yep.
For that one. That's listed for that one. So that was another thing too. It's you know, I just wondered why that is. So he's there. He sees the first one. 10 minutes later, after Ranya's autopsy starts, Mitchell Mori goes to do the autopsy on Kamel. Is there a reason? I mean, could they have waited? Or?
Well, I mean, we know that an autopsy takes a whole lot longer than 10 minutes. So why Mitchell is even on Ranya's autopsy, I have no idea. Because again, it takes a while to do one, and then 10 minutes later, he's starting Kamel's autopsy. So they had actually had both of these going at the same time. Really, both autopsies at the same time.
Right.
Maybe
and they also have
just
two
figured,
of the cops. Maybe they figured what?
Maybe they figured it would be if he's not actually a pathologist, maybe he's put as the pathologist on Kamel because she was already on Ranya's.
Yeah, he's listed as an assistant medical examiner on David's. And yeah, so every time that he signs, that's what he is. He's
the only thing
medical examiner.
Yeah, the only thing I can think of is maybe what they're referring to as pathologist on their report is the medical examiner who is actually conducting the autopsy. That's the only thing that makes sense by looking at this. Levinsky was doing Rania and Mori was doing Kamel.
All right, so Kamel, during her autopsy, Detective Sean McKnight and Detective Brian Bone are both there. So they were also with Ranya's. And so now you have probably, I'm assuming then Jim Gummert and Tommy Booth probably stayed with the Rania autopsy while these two cops go to the Kamel's. And I never really understood why they would need the cops there. What are they doing there? It sounds like they're just kind of there.
They don't have to be there. There's no rhyme or reason. I mean, they can be there maybe because they feel they want to follow through, but they don't really give the doctors any information. I mean, their input is not needed during an autopsy.
Now, wouldn't this help them see that a lot of the allegations are wrong? So at this point, these four officers, Gummert, Sean McKnight, Brian Bone, Tommy Booth, after being here present for this, shouldn't they start looking for somebody else?
You would think. That's what makes sense.
I mean, they're here. They have no excuse to say, well, we didn't know. We didn't know about the fractured third rib. You guys were there. We didn't know about whatever. No, you guys were all there. You four should know everything that you need to know that shows that there are still many, many questions, still many things to follow up on. I don't know.
Yeah.
Kamel was identified by the dental radiographs and the tattoos, so that's how they ID'd her. She weighed 85 pounds when they found her, which is a big difference from what she normally weighed. So if we're talking about, you know, the bodies being there, a dead body, how much weight does a body lose within a week, within 2 weeks, within 3 weeks of sitting there on a living room floor?
Do you know how much she weighed normally?
Yeah, it's in the 94 pages of police reports, and it is different than what they found her at. And I can pull that up, but I think it, obviously you want to be careful with women's weight, but I do believe it was different than what was on her, what's in the 94 pages. Let me just look at that here. So there's David. Kamel was 130. She's listed as 5'4" at 130 pounds in the 94 pages of Apple Valley Police document.
Wow, that's
But here, she's 85 pounds.
Yeah. I mean, we know that the human head, and again, I mean no disrespect to the families, and I hate to be so graphic, but I mean, we know the human head weighs roughly 10 pounds, but that even, you add that onto it, and that doesn't even come close to her stated weight.
Right. And I think David has something very similar. Let's see. Lividity, discoloration, and rigor were not recognized on her body. Body cavities contained small amounts of decomposition fluid. So does that show how long she's been dead? Does that help show?
I'm sorry, I had to go close my windows because someone's riding an RC car up and down the street. I'm sorry, what was your question?
So, what I was wondering is, there's one note that says that her body cavities contain small amounts of decomposition fluid. Does that help show how long she's been dead for, how long the body has been there for? No,
and that's, since it says small amounts, that really still fits in with where the rest of the body decomp is. What do they say? Moderate. I think hers strictly says moderate decomp, whereas David and Rania say early to moderate. But yeah, it fits in with the rest of it, with the moderate stage of decomp.
Okay. Let's see. Kamel was shot twice with both entrance wounds in the left posterior parietal region of the skull. So this looked like a double tap. That was the way that I read it. These two shots are very close. So I don't know. And that would kind of line in with some of that quote-unquote rapid fire that we've been hearing about from some of the neighbors in a previous chapter where they had heard several rapid fire shots. So I don't know.
But, the two gunshot wounds to her head, I mean, that would be like pow pow. I mean, that would be rapid fire. And if they're hearing multiple rapid fires, there just isn't enough projectiles found within the house to say that had to have been the same event. So I think it's safe to kind of go past that theory and let that theory lie.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably why the police never followed up with that theory, because it doesn't mesh up with what was found at the scene to have them appear to be the same events.
Right, and they're also, I believe, they're two separate dates too. So two different people are hearing rapid fire shots on different dates.
Exactly. Now, what page?
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. What page were you reading where it talks about the gunshot? I have her autopsy in front of me, where the entrance wounds are in the occipital region. Where are you reading that from?
Oh, let's see. I wonder if that was from. That was probably in the. I wonder if that's the external examination. And I was reading. Oh, from page 4, I believe, of Kamel.
Okay.
I think that's where it is. Yeah, there's some of that stuff there. I remember it was with the gunshot. Wasn't really mentioned.
Yeah, that's
Page 3.
I mean, not that it matters. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have interrupted you.
That's okay. No, that's okay. I mean, that's very important. Page 3, is that where it is?
Yeah, in page 3 of her autopsy, under external examination, it says the head consists of a portion of skull which includes most of the left occipital bone and portions of the adjacent left parietal bone.
Okay.
There is... Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
The scalp is absent.
Yeah.
That bothered me too. Yeah, all the soft tissue is gone, the hyoid bone, and yeah, it's just gone. Everything is. It's just weird.
How is the neck stable though? Like, what does that mean? It says the neck is stable, but most of it's missing. Like the.
Her vertebral column was still there, so I'm assuming that probably whatever part of the vertebral column was still there. It was still connected. It was still all part and together. It's not like part of it was hanging or disjointed or anything. So it was stable. In other words, it couldn't be moved really easily.
Okay.
Yeah, so brain tissue was gone from the skull. How is that? I mean, canine scavenging.
Yeah, because when you look at this, I mean, there's still occipital bone there, which you know that the C1 is going to be inside that occipital portion. So it would be so basically there was really not going to be, nor was there any damage to that vertebral column.
We also see irregular bony and soft tissue margins were consistent with canine scavenging. That's really the only mention of canine scavenging. In Rania's, it's not listed as canine scavenging. Now that could just be because we're talking about two different people doing different reports, right?
Yeah,
one is saying animal. Yeah, how they were wording it. Right. Most of the head and the hands were missing, and that's a big one. You know, when I tell people that, especially people in law enforcement, you know, you can see their eyes widen when you start talking about what is missing. The heads, most of the heads and the hands are missing. It's not something that should be taken so lightly, and I think that's one of the big ones. One of the big reasons why we were expecting the investigators not to guess so much on what happened and to just either say, you know, we have proof of it or we don't know. And those are simple things too. Very simple.
Yeah, when you have people who have knowledge of crime scenes or bodies or death or decomp, you know, medical people, police officers, people who actually have a history within these workforce areas, looking at these autopsy reports, they're going to be like, excuse me? This doesn't make sense. But when you have the average Joe Blow citizen who doesn't have a background in these areas, they're going to take it at face value at what they say and go, oh, well, they say that, so it must be true. And it's like, you know, that's where I think a lot of times where cases are allowed to remain the way they are because the vast majority of people don't know and don't understand. And that's what departments like this who either don't want to investigate or choose to cover up, whatever the case may be, that's what they're counting on, is the general consensus of those who have no knowledge, that they can tell them anything they want, and since it's coming from a person in a position of power, they're going to believe them. And unfortunately, that's true more oftentimes than not.
most definitely. Many of the bones found were consistent with fragmented digit bones. The distal aspects terminate with absence of the hands. And here, multiple bone fragments, wavy dark hair, and white cotton were all mentioned under the internal evidence section of this report. Amongst this bony material are 2 mandibles. One shows numerous restorations. In addition, there are 2 fragments of bone with 2 and 4 teeth. Multiple irregular bone fragments range from 1.2 to 8 centimeters in size. When they say irregular, what does that mean? Is that...
It could mean several things, but more than likely they were either broken up, somehow they were not the shape that they should have been, however they got that way.
Like damaged, or, I mean, from a gunshot, or...
Put it.
Yeah.
You know,
regarding animals... Go ahead.
Again, I'm sorry to keep cutting you off. We don't know if...
Okay.
My stance has always been that another dog was in this house because of the amount of white hair found everywhere, and Paleo did not have that much white fur. So could it have been due to another dog chewing up bones? Possible. Could it be due to were part of their facial bones, you know, broken up? Could they have been beaten? Possible. You know, there's just so many things that it could have been, but we don't know what it was. So, because they don't know what caused it, they just put irregular.
So this could have been tied to blunt force trauma?
Depending on the bones, yeah. On what they're talking, which bone pieces and fragments they had, yeah.
Interesting. Regarding animal scavenging of Kamel's neck, the forensic pathologist wrote the anterior musculature, hyoid bone, and the, I can't pronounce that, laryngeal cartilages are absent due to...
Where are you?
I'm reading from the book. Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Laryngeal cartilages.
Laryngeal cartilage are absent due to apparent animal scavenging. So they're blaming all of that. That's a lot to blame on the animal scavenging. And it's not really stated why they blame that on the animal scavenging. Yep.
And again, I want them to explain to me how a dog could get to her larynx if she's lying face down on a floor. How did he get to her face to eat it, but not the back of her head?
Can't.
Yep.
Not possible.
Exactly. They can't, and they don't explain that.
Right. All that remained of the neck was the exposed and intact cervical vertebral column. There is extensive bloating. So, bloating, how does bloating help with the decomp rate?
That is a definite sign of moderate decomp. That's what happens when the gases start to build up in the abdomen due to the tissues breaking down.
Let's see, hair was found on Kamel's right sock and anterior left leg. I thought that was kind of weird too, because it's not really, I mean, it just doesn't say what type of hair, human hair, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Hair everywhere.
I made note of that because when I was reading your book and I came across that, I went to the reports and I made note, because what I find interesting is her, because again, my theory has been that she was positioned and placed there after all of this, and that the bodies were then staged once everything was done. Now, how is it that hair can be on the anterior or on the front part of her leg, the leg that is lying on the ground? but the posterior, the back part of the leg that is exposed to the elements and to this dog who's supposedly tracking all this hair and debris around the house, the hair isn't there. It's only on the front that is lying on the floor.
So does this show then that her body was actually moved at some point?
It doesn't necessarily show it, but it's a good indication that something's awry with their theory, because how did that hair get on the ground? And like you said, it doesn't necessarily state, and they don't know whose hair. Was it David's hair? Was it her hair? Was it Rania's hair? They should have, again, you would think they would go, okay, there's hair on the anterior portion of her leg, and that was on the floor. So whose hair is that?
Was she's walking on somebody's hair? Or, yeah, I don't understand.
Right, her leg across somebody's hair. Yeah, I mean, and then if hair is on the floor prior to her being there. Now we know that from looking at photos of how she kept house prior to this incident. Now people tend to look at the police photos and they see stuff all over. And your first thought is, wow, they weren't very good housekeepers. But that's what the police did. They tend to tear things up as they're doing, collecting evidence. That's all normal. But when you look at her other photos of their house prior to that, she was actually a really good housekeeper. So I find it hard to believe that this hair would have been on the floor prior to, just due to a lack of housekeeping. So how did it get there? And that is, that just jumped out at me when I was reading this chapter in your book.
Yeah, it says her left sleeve of Kamel's sweater was frayed. And of course I had a hard, like, what do you mean by frayed? What is it frayed? But I guess it's kind of like, I guess like ribs, kind of. I mean, when I think of frayed, I think like those.
A fraying is where if it's knitted, which it probably was a knit weave fabric, where it starts to come apart. So it starts to unravel. Okay.
And it was weird because it was the left sleeve, not the right sleeve. We know both hands are missing. So that was another thing. I would expect it to be frayed on both sides, but maybe not. Maybe it's just more related to the sweater than anything else.
And again, you bring up an excellent point, because her left hand and arm is underneath her body, according to all of the reports from the police officers who were on scene. So that portion of that sweater was under her body. And like you said, her right hand was outside of the body. And the dog supposedly ate her right hand, but that sleeve is not frayed. However, the one under her body is frayed. And the dog can't even get to it. And they don't even bother to look into that further.
This is all stuff I think will hopefully one day help the case get reopened. I also found that it was interesting, still at the bottom of page 29 here. I think this is the last thing that I have on this page, but that she was wearing a Gray State shirt. And the reason why that was important is because we had heard so much about how Kamel didn't like this project. She wasn't for it, etc., etc. I just found it, I didn't, from reading David's post and from looking at all of the stuff there, it seemed like, she was his biggest fan. I didn't get the view that she was jealous of the whole Gray State project, that she felt that, slighted by it. I mean, she's wearing a T-shirt. I don't know. I just did not get that feeling that she had any issues with David's project.
And I agree with you, because everything that is filmed of her while they're doing David is doing the filming of the trailer, she is smiling, she's excited, they're talking, she's having a great time. I don't see one look on her face that says disgust, boredom, or anything. She's in it like everybody else. So, yeah, and I agree with you. Why would she wear a Gray State shirt if she's angry or jealous? That doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't fall in line with their theory, so I guess they just leave that out too.
Yep.
He had her reading the script. There was that clip of her he's like, so what'd you think of it? She's like, I wish I could watch it instead of read it. That's the only thing I hated about it. It seemed to me like she was, like you stated, his biggest fan. She was the one pushing him to do this. She was helping him. If she felt slighted by it in any way, she wouldn't have read it. She wouldn't have been standing with a computer on her head during filming. She wouldn't have been involved in it in any way. She wouldn't be happy about it either. Like, it's visibly, anybody who watches the videos with her in it, she's happy and smiling. She was promoting him, really.
Right. And then, she was quitting. Go ahead.
She was a model on the...
That's right.
For the T-shirt. It showed a picture of her smiling and with the front of the shirt and then kind of looking back, showing the back of the shirt. If she didn't want to be part of it, he wouldn't have used her for that. He wouldn't have used her in the little snaps throughout his filming for the Gray State.
Yeah, well, I would go one step further. Just with that is, if David was jealous, if he was so jealous of her and all that stuff, I don't think he would let her do that. I don't think he would want his wife on a poster with a T-shirt, posing like that. So that to me was just more proof that he was not as jealous as some might want us to think.
Right.
Right.
Okay, any final words on Camille?
Yeah, one thing I do want to add before we move on to David is we know that according to the toxicology report, Rania was clean. There was nothing in her system. We know David was completely clean. They did the toxicology report. We'll talk about that when we get to him. But with Camille's, hers was clean with the exception of salicylate being found in her system, which basically is just aspirin. So, again, she is clean too. There are no drugs, no alcohol in their systems at all, none. And when they're doing the toxicology reports on their liver, since they're doing here, this will follow through to David's as well. But with Camille, when they do toxicology reports, toxicology on liver, they use the liver because it tends to hold in drugs longer because medications and everything tends to metabolize in the liver. So it will remain in the liver a lot longer than it would blood and urine. And when the liver drug tests come back completely clean, they had no alcohol, that means no absinthe, no marijuana, no drugs, nothing in their system, with the exception of Camille, who had aspirin.
And wasn't she prescribed ibuprofen?
That I don't know.
I'm
there was
sure
some found at the house. Yeah.
Yeah, like on the in one of the drawers there was prescription for Camille of, I don't remember if it was $750 or $800.
Basically,
but it was ibuprofen.
She was just taking something very natural like aspirin, a pain reliever, and that was it.
Right.
They are clean. So the marijuana being on the dresser and that staging of trying to make it look like they were potheads is out the window. Their toxicology reports prove that's out the window. The theory that David was, loony and crazy due to absinthe, out the window. He had no alcohol in his system whatsoever. So all of those theories, all of those stories can be put to rest, according to the autopsy reports.
Interesting. Love it. Thanks for bringing that up, too. I think that's a huge point there.
Yes, thank you. I've been wondering what that is. Salicylate.
I mean, David had I think he had back issues. He had some problems. So I was really expecting to find that here. I was expecting to find him on some painkillers or something like that.
Yeah, something, because, yeah, when the IED exploded and it damaged his legs and hurt his legs and his back, you would think, because he, did state that he was in pain. However, I think he treated his pain with exercise because he was always exercising.
That's true. That is true. So for David, his autopsy begins at 11:40 a.m. on January 18th, 2015. No, that's not correct. The second press release happens at 11:40 a.m. on January 18th. 10 minutes later, at 10:50 a.m. is when David's autopsy begins. So by this point, they have already accused David of being guilty of killing his wife, his daughter, and himself. And 10 minutes later, they start to go over his body, which I did think that was, I don't understand why they were so quick to just, like they really needed to get the answer out first. But generally, we would want you to research first and then get the right answer, not just a answer. Go ahead.
Right, and the whole thing is that they had no results from anyone's autopsy. Toxicology had just been, being done and collected, hadn't even been sent off yet. They had nothing, and then they just go ahead and they start calling it murder-suicide. And in fact, you, I know you disagree with me saying this, but I'm always like, because that Chief Reitschel or whatever his name is, Chief R. He plainly states in again, in one of those newspaper articles things where he says within 2 hours they knew. And it's right. They talk about jumping to conclusions. You can't walk into a house like that and say, oh, okay, we know what this is. I don't care how much you have. You need to investigate it.
That would have been nice.
Would have been.
Would have been logical, but, not a lot of logic in a lot of the stuff we're seeing here. But, yeah, within 2 hours, within 4 hours, that's just crazy. There's no way. There's no way that they could possibly know.
Especially when they leave a house without, well, they still to this day don't have the bullet that killed them. So how can you walk out of a residence and say he committed suicide, but not retrieve the bullet or the fragment that killed him, or even anything? They just
yeah.
Okay.
Getting frustrated all over again.
Sorry.
Well, they didn't have his bullet, and they didn't have the one tied to his daughter either. So
correct.
They are consistent in that basis. Consistent in missing bullets.
That's it. Look at the bright side.
At this point, yeah, look at the bright side. Go ahead, Stephanie.
I had so who puts all the things in the body bag? Like at the crime scene, do we know that?
I don't know if that's the BCA. I'm assuming the BCA.
Or it could have been also the assistant that it's the name we've only heard or seen a few times, that Dr. Lelinski's assistant that showed up there with her. It could have been that person as well, or was it the police? I thought I read somewhere. Now I can't remember.
Yeah, you're talking about Greg Spandl.
Yes.
Greg Spandl was the medical examiner investigator who was with her. Yeah, he's there, and that's it. He's done. His investigation is over.
Trying to figure out how the two mandibles got into the same bag.
Well, because the reports state that the bones, and this is, again, a good question, because there was a mandible found on top of the blue blanket, but where? But the reports state that any bone fragments, whatever was closest to that body, was collected and sent with that body. So that's probably why those mandibles were closest to her, so they just collected it and stuck it with her. And then, you know, let the medical examiner figure out who belonged to who.
That's right. Let's see here. I was just looking at some of the questions in the chat room too. So here we have David, the pathologist was Jessica Lelinski, and Mitchell Morey is back. Detective Sean McKnight and Detective Brian Bone are both there during this process. And they have David weighing at 128 pounds. And again, that's going to be different from what they have him here, which is 180 pounds is what they have in the police files. So that's a big difference.
That's a huge
very important. Now, what would cause that? I mean, and maybe they're going by, well, I'm assuming, like, where did they get this 180 from? The 180 has to come from his driver's license?
Yeah, I would think so. Either his driver's license or any medical records that they were able to get. But
that's still a big difference on 20.
Yeah, when you look at him, he may not be a tall man, but he is a very fit, muscular man. So muscle weighs more than fat. And so, you know, well, okay, a pound of fat is still the same as a pound of muscle, but you know what I mean. He was very fit, and he had to have weighed a whole lot more than 128 pounds or 138 pounds. So why didn't they check that out?
Right.
I had it in my head that Kamel was 120 pounds and he was 185 pounds.
That's close. That's close to what these documents say. So it's a big difference.
128 pounds for
David.
For David, not Kamel. Oh wow.
Yeah, Kamel was 85. She was found 85 pounds. Normally, at they said 130. David was found 128 pounds. Normally, at about 180. So that's a big difference.
Is that normal for them to lose that much weight after death?
Not in any of the dead people I've ever seen. If they were 150 when they died, they were 150 a week later, you know? So I have no explanation as to why the drastic weight loss for either one of them.
Well, I would think drugs, you know, but again, we're looking at the tox, and there were no drugs in their system, so
they were completely
doesn't make sense.
Clean. Yeah.
They were in the process of making food. So I don't think they had any issues like that. I don't know. There's no answer for that.
Yep, none.
You assume that it would be in their system. I mean, Pop's found in the house, so you assume it would be in one or the other system. But toxicology coming back negative for that.
And again,
well, why was it even open if it's not in either of their systems? Like, it's common in somebody who overdoses.
Well, and again, that all goes right back to the police not investigating, because especially when the toxicology reports came back, those take longer. But the moment they came back and they were sent to the police station, the police should have then looked at that and said, okay, there was marijuana open on their dresser. There was a bong in the bathroom that looked to have been cleaned right away or relatively within a certain time frame. But everything on their toxicology reports come back clean. They are clean of everything. So that then tells them the scene is staged. They should have then gone to look to see, okay, why was this placed here? Who placed that there? Because people who smoke pot, but then, you know, kind of collect it and save it for later, aren't going to leave it open and just sitting out.
No, they don't. If you're about to smoke, you would have it all out like that.
Right.
It being left like that points to a scene interrupted. But,
or a staged scene.
Yes, or a staged scene. It's sadly nobody followed up on this. If David was alive and that came back negative, they would have done more follow-up so that they could continue to prosecute him and have him in jail for this crime. None of that was done. None of the things that you would normally see in cases like this, we'll say, where there's, I think they're called family annihilators. Like a person who just kills their whole family, just snaps and kills their whole family. To take them to court and show that they did this crime, there's follow-up questions, there's testing upon testing upon testing to prove what they say happened so that any judge or jury is completely clear on what happened and why that person needs to be put in jail.
Right.
With them saying David did this, there's no... it's almost reminiscent of, like, 1930s era detective work. You know, oh, well, they're all dead, the dog's alive, so the missing body parts are from the dog eating it. And the gun's by him, so he must have done it. Case closed. Like, there's no...
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want to jump back to a point you were making, and then maybe we should probably get back to the autopsy report. But I think this goes along with the autopsy and with his mental status. The fact that they keep stating, and that Captain R in the little sloppumentary was stating, oh, well, we think he just snapped. That is an extremely rare psychological event. There was no evidence of David being under stress. There was no evidence that he was had flashbacks. There was no evidence that he was under anything that would cause him to have a reason to quote-unquote snap. And for someone to snap without reason generally doesn't happen. So nothing, and we know it wasn't due to alcohol, we know it wasn't due to drugs, we know it wasn't due to flashbacks or PTSD, we know all of that is fabricated and not true. So
right.
There is no rhyme or reason for him to have been accused of this crime. None.
Right.
Right. It also says David was identified by the dental records and the body tats. The problem here that I'm having with the identifications is the date that these reports are done on January 18th. The bodies aren't positively identified until January 21st. So I'm having another problem with that. How are they justifying this? At this point, the bodies, it sounds like the bodies should have been identified on January 18th. The positive ID is not mentioned in the AVPD press releases until January 21st. And someone could say, well, maybe they just waited until January 21st. Yeah, but they have, there are other AVPD press releases that say that the bodies have not been positively identified. So I'm trying to understand this logic here. If they haven't been identified, is that because the Hennepin County medical examiner hasn't told the Apple Valley Police Department yet, even though the Apple Valley Police Department are in these autopsies, so they're there, so they know that the bodies have been identified. Why are they still saying after January 19th, January 20th, January 21st, that the bodies have not been positively identified?
Well, there's a difference between being tentatively identified and then positively identified. And they went on looking at photos, and the bodies were in the house belonged to. So tentatively, yes, those were more than likely the victims. So they can be identified as. But the positive, without doubt, identification comes after the medical examiner office then gets a copy of his dental records from the dentist. They make comparison with the teeth that they have, and then they can make the positive identification.
Gotcha. Makes sense. David's autopsy shows early to moderate decomposition, and that's evidenced by the skin discoloration, the marbling, slippage, blistering, and the mummification of the left hand and feet. Now, the mummification of the left hand, everybody can see what David's left hand looks like. There is an image, BCA 4777, shows you exactly what David's left hand what his left, I don't want to say a sign that his left hand was making, but you can see the condition of his left hand. And it is a very curious left hand, I think.
Well, yeah, and
one
then
of the more weirder things.
Here's the problem I have with that, and this is what I just sent you in my email to, what was his name, Tom Lydon, the one who did his little expose on the news.
Yeah.
And I have not heard back from him, not hide nor hair, and this was my second email to him. But I pointed out to him, and I sent him both photos. When you look at the photo of the bodies in, I did some lightning and zooming in on that hand, and then you compare the position of the hand in that photo to the close-up of that photo of the hand being next, like the photo you're talking about. That hand is in two different positions. The first one with the bodies just lying there with his arm outstretched, the right finger, the index finger, is not next to the thumb like it is in the close-up photo showing the OK or the 666 or whatever the case may be sign. So who moved the finger? And that's why I asked Tom Lydon. I'm like, shouldn't you be asking who moved that finger? Here's the photo where it shows his fingers are all up and outstretched. Then you have a close-up where the right index finger is now touching the thumb. Who did that? These photos both were taken when the police got there and then during their time they were there. So the only people in that house to move that hand were either the police or the BCA. Who did it and why?
That's right.
We wouldn't have
let's
snapped.
see, anything else? It wouldn't have what?
The pointer finger wouldn't have snapped, like, off or broken in some way when it was moved?
The rigor mortis had already been gone. The fingers would have been pliable.
I didn't know that.
Well, and I did read somewhere, and well, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I'll go find that for our next one. So when I find it, then we can talk about it next time.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I do want to kind of wind this down here. Getting pretty close to the end here. I know this has gone a little bit longer, but that's okay. We're almost done with this. Just looking at David's head. So due to the condition of David's head, they were unable to determine the entrance, the pathway, and the trajectory of the gunshot wound. So that shows that they tried, right? They tried to find the trajectory. No, okay, maybe not. Maybe not. They just looked at it and said, there's no point of even looking to figure it out. That's pretty odd. They did determine the bullet exited through the left parietal bone.
Sorry, Kamel had more gunshots, so I can understand not being able to figure out where the entrance or exit was for her. But if he just had one, I mean, Randy was shot once, and it was pretty cut and tie to see where it came in and where it went out. If he was just shot once, shouldn't it be like the same? Like,
well, there's a difference because with Camille, it was they could find the entrance wound, and so they were able to determine the trajectory. With David, they only had an exit section, so the entrance wound, that portion of the skull was not found, and so they had no way of knowing how it entered. They only know how it exited. So that could be why.
Which I think is weird, looking at the photo of David's head, right? I mean, even though it is kind of back and it's kind of hard to really see or to close up on, it's like it looked to me like more of the left side was missing of his head than the right side. So I always found that kind of weird, how they were able to find the exit.
Well,
most of the left side of his head was missing.
But see, the left parietal bone was still attached. So that's the left side, so that was still there, and so they know where it came out. But since when a bullet is shot into a head, it could easily bounce around. So you can only know if there's an exit wound where it's coming out of. You don't know where it entered. Now, the exact opposite is true of Camille, because they know where it entered, and they might not necessarily know where it came out, so they can determine how the weapon was positioned against her head to cause that entrance wound. But David's entrance wound is missing.
Gotcha. And I think what we're going to find next is, I mean, Catherine, when you were reading this, is this what led you down the blunt force trauma? I mean, is there anything that we're seeing here that lines up with the blunt force trauma that you found clearly in a couple of those photos, the crime scene photos?
No, nothing in the autopsy reports. In fact, that's why I went back to see, going, okay, this photo in this skull piece clearly shows blunt force trauma. So I went immediately to the autopsy reports to go, okay, they had to have mentioned this, but there is no mention in the autopsy reports at all, at least not here. Now, in the extensive, thicker medical examiner report, we don't know, and we will never know, again, because by law, those are not to be released to anyone other than the families. The families can request, but anybody else can't.
But wouldn't that stuff be some of the basic things to mention? I mean, there's no reason.
Well, yeah.
And I guess there is a reason not to mention.
Exactly, because when they mention the larger skull piece, they just say that this large skull piece that then articulates well with the remaining calvarium. You would think that they would mention that the skull piece has indentations on it, but they say nothing. Not at all. And the indentations are clear. I mean, a 2-year-old could look at it and go, oh, look, there's marks. Compare that with a regular skull cap, and then you look at his, and I mean, you know, I hate to say this, but a 5-year-old could tell you that there's something wrong with David's scalp. Or I'm not, sorry, not scalp, but his skull.
And so these skull bone fragments ranging from 1.5 to 14.5, is that would the image of the blunt force trauma, would that fall in line? Would that fall into this category, 1.5 to 14.5 centimeters?
Well, what I did.
Or is that something different? Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess, wait a second. Were you trying to ask me? I don't think I understood.
Oh, I'm just saying, so, where is it here? They were mentioned that skull bone fragments were found. Mm-hmm. And does that line up with the blunt force trauma image, or is that something different? And is
Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying.
size?
Yes. And what I did, and I know this isn't exactly scientific, but it's all we have at this point. If you look at the photos with the skull piece, they have a little measure marker tape thing, correct? And so what I did is I took a piece of paper on the screen, and then I took that and found out how much their centimeters were on that, and then measured it out on the picture of the scalp. Again, this is not scientific, but it's all we have at this point. And the dimensions were exactly that. For that skull cap piece was exactly what was found, and then that fit, that articulated well and fit with his calvarium.
Interesting. So this is where it says separately a non-articulating 8.5 centimeter maximum dimension skull bone fragment with a rounded defect along one edge with apparent internal beveling. That's pretty interesting. I noted that for some reason, but I can't remember why I noted that now. Rounded defect. I guess that was the rounded defect. So that would be, I guess I was trying to figure out what that rounded defect was. Most likely.
Well, I'm assuming that would have been either an exit or an entrance wound. It would have to be of some sort, but, or we don't know, could it have been from whatever weapon was used to hit them? They don't even, you're right, they don't even clarify. I'm reading that right now on page 3 of the autopsy report, and it just states rounded defect. But what type of defect?
Right.
Was it a complete round circle? And if it was a complete round circle, then they would have stated if it was a gunshot exit or entrance wound, because it would have had beveling. They don't speak of beveling, they just say rounded defect.
Oh, these guys. Let's see. So, examined separately from David's body at the time of the autopsy was a maxilla with well-preserved teeth. And I guess that was, it's mentioned here, so if it's mentioned here, that it's got to be tied to David, right?
Oh, that's okay.
I mean, I would assume so.
This goes back. Okay, I want to clarify now, because there were 2 mandibles found with Kamel, and I remember I stated that there was one on the blanket. It wasn't the mandible that was found on the blanket. It was the maxilla. And so that's why. Okay, I get it now. So now we don't have. I haven't seen any photos of the mandibles, but we have definitely seen that photo of the maxilla, which is what they're describing here. That was transferred with David. But they don't say if it belongs to him or not. It was just in the evidence bag, because that was on his body and next to his body, so it was transferred with his body. But they don't state who it belonged to.
And the maxilla is the upper or the bottom portion?
Upper. The mandible will be the bottom, maxilla is upper.
Okay, and the one found on the blue blanket is a...
That's the maxilla. That's what they're talking about right here.
Okay. Looking at the image, though, it kind of looks like David's maxilla is still there, right?
I did not see a maxilla on his photo. The whole front part of his face is gone. It's gone.
It kind of looks, I'll have to go back and look at that again. But where it's found, I mean, that's nowhere near David's head. David's head is, if you're looking at the, you're looking through the front window, if you're standing in front of the Crowley home and you're looking through the window, the maxilla on the blue blanket is found to the left, next to the bloody wall, but David's head is facing right, next to the Christmas tree.
Correct.
That's a long way for it to get over there. I mean, it just...
In an odd place, if the dog had done that, just to leave it there.
To leave it right there.
With no evidence of him gnawing on it or chewing on it, it would just drop it right there? No. It looks placed. Again, that looks staged as well. In my opinion.
Hardcore.
Yeah.
How hard is that to remove from a human head, from a human body?
Extremely difficult. It's hard. That would not be an easy thing for a dog to do.
That's disturbing. This report also claimed Puleo was responsible for the absence of David's brain, the majority of his skull, the neck skin, neck soft tissue, neck muscles, the hyoid bone. I think at this point I was just so frustrated with what I was reading. I could not believe that they were blaming the dog for all of this stuff here. And it was very, very frustrating. So I just decided to just list all of the things that they were blaming the dog for.
Yeah, and not only
testing, without anything. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Greg. I keep cutting you off. I'm so sorry. But it's interesting that they blamed Paleo for so much of this stuff, but yet this is one very picky dog, very discriminating taste. It's going to choose just this, the hardest bones of the body, over what is easy to get to, easy to remove. But let's go for the hardest bones, and we're just going to eat them all up. I'm like, wow, really? Okay. How gullible do they really believe people are? I don't get it.
I don't either. I mean, you can see his left hand. Those fingers are they're just there. They're up there. You know, it's very easy to take those, but instead, the dog apparently only goes for David's right hand and doesn't touch the left hand. Yeah, again, it's baffling. Yep. Regarding the missing right hand, the distal right forearm shows intact smooth ends of the radius and ulna and irregularly contoured soft tissue, muscle, and skin. So does that line up with animal scavenging?
I'm trying to find that on the report.
The report.
Wait, that's intro. We need external. Okay, I'm sorry. What part are we reading? The remaining. Wait, where are you?
Yeah,
oh, it's actually regarding the missing right hand. Okay, I see.
Yeah.
The right hand is absent. The distal right forearm shows intact, smooth ends of the radius and ulna and irregularly contoured soft tissue, muscle, and skin. That to me does not say, and my first thought process on that is not dog scavenging. That could be consistent with a pulling away of a hand, or pulling, you know, same thing like with the arm. Did somebody pull that hand off that? And I see nothing here that says dog scavenging.
That's very curious then.
No, especially with the smooth ends of the radius and ulna. If a dog is going to be chewing on a hand to remove it from a body, if it could do that, there would be teeth marks. It would no longer be smooth. There would be, you know, gnaw marks on those bones, and there's nothing. It's smooth.
It's smooth. That's a key. That's a key word too. You know, that it was smooth. It's like, wait a minute. It says jagged, I believe, for one of the other body parts, but for this one, it's, you know, there's nothing mentioned like that. It's really weird. It's really odd. There's nothing consistent in this. So,
I agree.
See. I think that's about it. Unless you guys have any final questions here, we can go ahead and shut this podcast down. I did anticipate this one being a little bit longer because of all this, and because I knew I had 1,000 questions that I was going to ask you, Catherine. And you were able to answer everything for me, so thank you again. Thank you again for joining us here.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. The only thing I really want to reiterate, and I know I've said this 1,000 times, is I really once and for all want to put to rest the theories out there that have been going around about David being, drinking on drugs, and that's what caused him to do this. According to the toxicology reports, which were the samples were taken from his liver, tested from his liver, he was clean of all alcohol, all drugs, everything. His system was completely and totally clean. They will check the liver because the liver tends to hold on to drugs and stuff more because that's where things are metabolized, is in the liver, so it will be stored. And since the liver tissues were clean, he had not in anywhere, any time prior to, close to, near the time of their deaths, and I'm talking at least a month or two, maybe longer, prior to that, did he have, especially pot, that for sure was not in his system. Not prior to their deaths did he have any alcohol. He was clean. She was clean. Other than aspirin, Rania was clean. So those who are saying that the toxicology reports show them wrong.
Awesome. Great points. Stephanie, any final words before we shut this down here? Did we lose Stephanie?
Did we lose her?
We might have.
Okay, well, thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you very, very much. And next time we'll come back next month. Remember, we do these on the 1st of every month. This was the first live podcast that we've done. So I want to appreciate everyone, all of your efforts, all of your help to get the case reopened. That is the goal here, to get justice for this family, to let people know that David Crowley is not guilty, has not been proven guilty, and will never be proven guilty. And next month we will come back here and we will discuss the living room chapter. So I hope you all join us for that. God bless you all and have a great Sunday.